changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. It's Thoughtful Thursday, and that means I'm going to share a story with you, one that gave me new perspective, that made me stop and think. Sometimes our stories are very simple, and that makes them even more effective. Sometimes they just involve a few well-chosen words, words that can change your life, and they make you realize something that should have been obvious all along. What's really startling is when it is a child who utters those few well-chosen words. And that's what our story is about today. It's called We Make Our Own Choices, and it's from a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul, From Lemons to Lemonade. So in this story, Donald Quinn Dillon talks about how he was forced to cut back his busy healthcare practice when his wife suffered serious postpartum depression that actually landed her in the hospital for a few weeks. And Donald took charge of his 3-year-old son, Gabriel, and his 9-month-old son, Noah. And Donald says, before this incident, I'd never been alone with the children for more than 8 hours at a time, and now I was their primary caretaker. So I know how that is, and the women out there will sympathize with me. Somehow men feel that taking care of the kids is a really big deal. I remember when my second child was born, I had a C-section, my older child was only 2, and my husband had to go away because his grandmother died right after the baby was born. So I was all alone for several days with a newborn baby, a 2-year-old, and recovering from a C-section, which made it hard to move at all. But I did it because that's what women do. And then a few months later, I went off to spend just the afternoon at a baby shower for a friend, and my husband was going to be alone with the kids for about 4 hours, 4 whole hours. And he called in the troops. His mother and his sister came to help the poor man, left alone with the kids for an afternoon. But anyway, getting back to Donald, who was left alone with his 3-year-old and his newborn, he was feeling sorry for himself. But as he tells us, it ended up being a great experience because he had to give up his daily 2-hour commute. He had to give up his packed calendar, and he had to give up his volunteer work for a professional association. He was finally spending valuable time with his children. He got to know his kids, and he got to talk to them without their mom being there as the dominant parent. And then one day, Donald and the 3-year-old, Gabriel, were playing outside, and the little boy turned to Donald and said something so simple and yet so illuminating. He said, "Daddy, we make our own choices." And Donald wrote in his story, I stared in disbelief. How could a boy so young say something so profound? The full impact of this message did not resonate with me at the time. But as I relayed the story to friends and family, I understood the clear message. We make our own choices. Donald realized that he had his priorities all wrong. He went on to say in his story, I was justifying my long hours and my professional position as being best for the family. But then I realized my family had not been my first priority. Instead, I had focused on status, prestige, and my desire for more material things. I would have to change if I wanted to experience the home life I desired and that my family deserved. I made the decision to choose balance and happiness. So there's a great quote from the French author and philosopher Albert Camus. Camus said, "Life is the sum of all your choices." And that's what Donald figured out. We don't have power over everything in our lives, but we do have the power to make our own choices. Donald realized he had to take responsibility for the poor choices that he had made about his work-life balance. And now Donald sees everything through the prism of his 3-year-old's wise observation. He concludes his story by saying, "My life has far greater integrity now. My wife is strong and vibrant, and she's the happiest I've ever seen her in our marriage. The boys recognize the stability in our family, and they're confident, healthy, and loving. And I am aware that every day I make my own choices." So I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. Now, tomorrow is Friend Friday, and we're going to talk with the dynamic Lee Woodruff, wife of Bob Woodruff, the reporter who suffered a traumatic brain injury while embedded with the Army in Iraq. Lee was the forward writer for our book, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Recovering from Traumatic Brain Injuries. And she's also written the foreword for a new book that we have coming out in June, Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Spirit of America. So we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about. I'm Amy Newmark. Thanks for listening today. Please share the podcast with your family and friends. Our listenership is soaring, so I'm very excited about that. It's been a big success, but I work really hard on it, so of course I want even more listeners. And if you'd like to read more thought-provoking, life-changing stories, advice, and tips from the book I mentioned today, Chicken Soup for the Soul, From Lemons to Lemonade, then please go to our website, chickensoup.com.